Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We are totally stripping away the glossy, perfect surface of our technology to journey into the decaying physical reality that actually props up our entire digital lives. We're stepping away from those sleek little screens in our pockets, and we're walking straight into the data ossuaries, the physical warehouses of rotten code.
Okay, let's dive into this because, the very first thing you notice when you step inside an abandoned data center isn't the silence, it's actually the smell. Imagine standing in a massive tomb of silicon and spun metal. The scent hits you, and it feels almost biological. It's this heavy, suffocating mixture of wet dust, burnt plastic, leaking coolant, and oxidized metal, just hanging there in the stagnant air. You're completely surrounded by row after row of dead server racks standing in the dark. Their lights are totally extinguished, and you've got these severed fiber cables drooping from the ceilings like veins torn from a body. And then, somewhere in that pitch-black gloom, you hear it. It's a rhythmic, mechanical clicking. Honestly, it sounds exactly like a dying insect. Forensic examiners and IT technicians actually call this the click of death. What you're hearing in that moment is the physical sound of a hard drive actuator arm scraping across a platter, failing to find its memory. It's the haunting sound of a machine desperately trying to remember its data and just completely failing. We all kind of operate under this mass delusion, don't we? This idea that our data is immortal, that our history, our photos, our finances are just weightless and safely floating up there in some eternal cloud. But the brutal reality is that data has always had a body. And right now, across the globe, those physical bodies are being left to face the devastating physics of decay. We're talking about bankrupt crypto mining farms in rural China, collapsed hosting warehouses in Eastern Europe, and forgotten telecom bunkers right here in the US. Our entire digital civilization depends on fragile, physical matter that is quite literally liquefying. Section 1. Macro Failure. How Data Centers Die. So these massive monuments to information don't die in some huge cinematic explosion, right? They die through a really slow, boring financial domino effect. It starts with step 1, a single missed payment. A hosting company goes under, they fail to pay the utility bill. Step 2, those massive HVAC systems wind to a stop. That means the constant scrubbing of the atmosphere just ceases. Step 3, without climate control, you get immediate temperature swings. The heat drops at night, the cold spikes during the day. And that leads us straight to step 4, condensation and poisoning. Without the giant fans acting as lungs to push the air out, the facility simply begins to poison itself. Listen to this quote from Marcus Lee, a former data center technician who was testifying during a bankruptcy hearing. He said, "These machines don't just turn off, they sweat." It's a remarkably visceral, almost biological metaphor. Because at night, condensation forms across the cold metal surfaces of the servers, and by the time morning rolls around, actual water droplets are physically clinging to the computer processors and the high-voltage power rails. Section 2. Microfailure. The chemical autopsy. Now, what's really interesting to look at here, as we zoom in from the macro level of the whole warehouse, is the microscopic ways this hardware starts to cannibalize itself once that condensation sets in. Remember this number, 10 degrees. Every 10-degree increase in temperature inside these suffocating rooms doesn't just make things a bit warmer. It literally doubles the rate of chemical degradation. Capacitors dry out incredibly fast, and they start leaking this highly corrosive electrolytic fluid directly onto the backplanes of the servers. The decay just accelerates exponentially. And that rapid decay leads to this fascinating but terrifying phenomenon called creep corrosion. There's a really dark irony here, actually. In the tech industry's big drive to remove toxic lead from electronics, they pivoted to using immersion silver for their circuit board finishes. But silver is hungry. In the stagnant, humid air of an abandoned facility, that silver reacts with ambient sulfur, which can literally just off-gas from nearby sewers or even the cheap drywall in the building. It creates this dark, fuzzy growth that looks exactly like mold, but it isn't mold. It's a highly conductive silver sulfide that grows these tendrils across the board, bridging gaps between circuits that were never ever meant to touch, and it fatally shorts out the entire chassis. It gets worse, because even the dirt in the room turns against the machines. Once the heat stops keeping the moisture at bay, the dust settles. It absorbs the humidity in the air and becomes what's known as a delicescent electrolyte. Basically, this means the dust is no longer just harmless dirt. It becomes a thin, weaponized layer of weak acid sitting directly on the motherboards. And that acid triggers something called electromigration. Think about a standard motherboard. You have dissimilar metals meeting everywhere, like a copper trace connecting to a tin solder joint. When that acidic moisture bridges those two metals, it creates a microscopic battery. So even when the power cords are completely unplugged from the wall, a ghost of voltage still moves through chemical reactions. Ions start to flow, and the metal actually migrates, growing these conductive filaments called dendrites between the logic pathways. It permanently destroys the board's brain.
Section 3. Memory detachment. When machines forget. So the logic boards are totally fried, right? But what about the actual data? Well, hard drives suffer from a fatal physical failure called stiction. Inside a hard drive, the platters holding your data are coated with a ferromagnetic material that is only nanometers thick. In these humid, decaying environments, the read/write head literally welds itself to that platter. When forensic investigators pry open these sealed drives later on, they find that the magnetic substrate has completely flaked off the glass. It ends up looking like a CD that was left out in a sandstorm. The data wasn't deleted by a keystroke, it physically detached from the disk. And hey, if you think backup tapes are safer, think again. They suffer from something called sticky shed syndrome. The moisture breaks down the chemical binders that actually hold the magnetic tape together. To give you a terrifying real-world example of this, authorities in Eastern Europe recently entered a flooded basement archive of a collapsed hosting company. They found critical client records, healthcare data, and massive legal archives just decomposing in standing water. The tapes had literally melted away into a useless chemical sludge. Section 4. The fallout. Toxic aftermath. Let's zoom back out and look at the bigger picture. What actually happens to the physical world when the digital world rots? A maintenance worker named Elena Vorobyov described an abandoned crypto mining warehouse perfectly. She said, while people online talked about digital wealth, inside it looked like an industrial slaughterhouse. Because inside, batteries had entered thermal runaway, swelling up like diseased organs. Thousands of incredibly expensive GPU rigs had effectively fused themselves together through extreme heat and severe corrosion. So the crucial point is we are looking at a massive dual threat here. First, there's the environmental nightmare. Toxic substances like lead solder, cadmium, mercury, and battery acids seep directly into the soil and the groundwater. The ethereal cloud becomes a very real physical poison on the ground. Second, there's a huge crisis for justice. Cybercrime investigators are finding that crucial evidence, everything from ransomware infrastructure to illegal hosting sites, is entirely unrecoverable. Physical decay gets to the servers before the investigators can. The rot acts as the ultimate, completely irreversible deletion. And here is the starkest reality check of all. You cannot hack hardware back to life. There is no OS reinstall, there is no software patch you can run when the copper traces have literally turned to oxide and the silver finishes have turned to sulfide. These massive, multi-million-dollar facilities simply return to the earth, becoming nothing more than low-grade metal deposits scattered across cracked concrete floors. We've basically traded the permanence of stone and paper for a system that requires constant artificial stabilization just to exist for one more hour. The internet isn't floating safely in the sky. It's trapped inside these highly vulnerable rooms full of heat-sensitive metal, fighting a never-ending war against moisture and time. So if entropy always wins, and our civilization is building its future on a foundation of rust, what is the true lifespan of your digital world? Definitely something to think about the next time you casually save a file to the cloud. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.